Good afternoon. This is Don Fine of Potomac Valley Fly Fishers, and today we're going to be teaching the July pattern of the month, and that is going to be the white miller. Now, the white miller may sound like a moth, but actually it is a caddisfly that hatches on many of the streams on the East Coast, but in particular it hatches nearby our location, and that would be on the Potomac River. And it generally that hatch starts around Washington, D.C., early in the month of July, and as the weather and the summer proceeds, the white millers begin to hatch further and further up the Potomac River, such that by the third or fourth week in the month of July, the white miller is hatching around Shepherdstown, Maryland, which is a location where our club often goes fly fishing for smallmouth bass and bluegills and other more warm water species. So the two flies that I'm going to be teaching today are both forms of the white miller. The first, which I'm going to be teaching, is going to be the emerging pattern of the white miller, and it's fished pretty much as a subsurface fly, just drifting in the surface film. As the fly begins to emerge, then it develops into more of an adult with a wing structure that's represented pretty much by this standard type of caddis pattern. But notice the color of both of these, and that is that they are light, they're white, or very light tan. And so that is the color of the natural fly as it emerges. And if you're not aware of it, the life cycle of the white miller is very short as an adult. And that is, the white miller is, as it hatches, does not have any legs, because no sooner does it hatch and begin to fly off the water, but it will mate. The males and females will mate over the water, and then the females, being now fertilized, will drop down on the water and lay their eggs. And before dark, or slightly after dark on that day that they hatch, the adults die, and they are found floating and many times by the millions on the surface, which is a challenge for the fly fisher, because the fish have to be trying to select out your pattern amongst all of the other real, actual white millers that are on the surface. So perhaps one of the better times to fish is not during the prolific part of the hatch, but rather a little bit before dark, as the flies are beginning to emerge. And that's why I'm going to be teaching both the immature and the mature parts of the white miller hatch. Hope that you enjoy our tying today. Well, the first fly that we're going to be tying is going to be the emerger of the white fly. So I'm going to start my thread just about mid-shank and wrap it back to the bend of the hook, as such. And then stopping just about at the bend, I'm going to clip off the excess thread. And by the way, I'm using 6/0, and it's sort of a very light tan colored wrapping thread, tying thread. The next thing I'm going to be doing is taking a little bit of this bright dubbing. It's made by Orvis, and I'm going to take some of the pearl and pull off a small amount. And this is going to be sort of loosely wrapped, and then you'll see me brush it out. So just going to moisten my fingers a little bit and wrap a little bit of this dubbing onto the thread. Remember, if you are still a beginner's fly tyer, that you want to always be wrapping your dubbing on in a counterclockwise direction. And that way, as you're wrapping the thread forward it's actually tightening the dubbing onto the body of the fly as compared to the opposite direction, which it would be unwrapping the dubbing. So I'm starting just about at the beginning of the bend, making a few light wraps there, and then beginning to proceed forward, laying down a nice layer of this crystal dubbing, stopping just about 1/3 of the distance behind the eye of the hook. Perhaps one more wrap right there will do it. And then putting in a half hitch to just hold that for the time being. The next thing I'm going to do is dub another section of the thread with more of a dark olive dubbing. And this is going to represent then, whereas the first dubbing was the abdomen, this represents the thorax. Again, I'll apply it in the same manner that I did before with the white. And then right in front of that white, I'm going to be wrapping in this olive type of crystal dubbing. In this particular case, it's referred to as dark olive. And there's also another color that's very close to it, which is called peacock, which is just a little bit darker and could be used also. So I'm going to bring my thread forward and also secure that with a half hitch. Now the reason I'm doing that is because of what I want to do before I proceed any further is I need to brush out that dubbing so that it's very loose. So I have a tool that I generally use for that, and it basically is a piece of, it's a tubing from a ballpoint pen in which I have glued onto it some Velcro type material, which I find to be very good as a dubbing brush. Notice the next thing I'm going to do is take my little dubbing brush and begin to stroke out and pull out the fibers of this dubbing, which is basically going to create sort of a halo effect around the fly, around its abdomen, and become more realistic, as if the caddis were removing its shuck as it's maturing at the surface. So now that I have that pretty much scuffed up, we can proceed to put on the wing. So I'm going to set my dubbing aside, just trim a little bit of these extra fibers away from the thorax. And now I'm going to select a small cream-colored, cream or white, I prefer cream, hen hackle. Hen hackles are generally shorter than your full-size neck or saddled hackles. So I'm going to trim away some of the bottom of that, which we definitely don't need. And I'm cutting away just a little bit of the fibers from the very bottom of this hackle and laying the hackle then right in front and along my side of the fly in that section where there is bare shank of the hook, moving my bobbin holder out of the way, and then holding this with the stem portion pointing down and tip slightly, which is going to make it much easier for me to tie this in. And a few wraps of thread around the base here, and then bring my thread slightly forward. Now, it will help if you are interested in doing this to put another half hitch just to secure your thread right in place where you've tied in that hackle. And I can pull my bobbin holder back, lay my thread across it, and then begin using a pair of hackle pliers to wrap the hackle around the neck of the fly. with each successive wrap, I'm going to gently stroke some of these fibers back, which is a standard method that you use for doing soft hackle plies. So again, one more turn. Again, pulling the hackle fibers back. I'm going to make one more turn. Again, pulling them back. And so those three wraps have been pretty much very close to one another. Now I'm going to take the thread off of the bobbin holder. I'm going to make one wrap with the thread behind the loose part of the hackle. Pull everything forward and then make a wrap in front. So I can now clip off the excess hackle. And then by holding the fibers back with my left hand, I'm able to build up a head on this fly right in front, which is going to pull those hackle fibers back. And I hope that you can see that in the video, that these fibers of the hackle are all now slanting back. So just a few more wraps, and I'll use my whip finisher, finish off the head of this fly, and we'll be finished. I think what I'll do, though, is put a little drop of head cement on there just to secure everything. Now that I've put my several hatches in, half hitches in, I can trim off that extra, as well as the thread, and a little drop of head cement on there. And our first fly is now complete. And this would be then the white fly emerger. Okay, well, now we're going to tie the next version of the white fly, and this is going to be what's referred to as the skittering emergent white miller. Now, this particular pattern I took off of the internet, and it is a pattern that's shown, or the full demonstration of this is by the Blue Ribbon Fly Shop. So if you wish to look at that on the internet and compare it with our video here, please do so. The first thing I'm going to do, and I've already frankly done it, is I've inserted a size 12 Sabre dry fly and light nymph hook in size 12. Now, I failed to mention in the first video that probably you want to tie this in a 12 and then slightly smaller, perhaps a 14, which is going to probably more realistically simulate the actual natural insect. So as I've done before, I'm going to start my thread just about mid-shank and wrap it back to the bend of the hook, stopping very close to the bend, start of the bend, clipping off my excess. And then I'm going to take a small section of this Zelon material, which has a tendency to glisten. And this is very much like the Antron that Gary LaFontaine describes in his book, which he used for most of his caddisfly patterns, because it is a trilobal type of, meaning it has three sides. The original material was produced by the DuPont Corporation, and so it comes under other names such as Zelon. It's basically the same material. So I've taken a small portion of that, and I'm going to lay that right on top of the hook where my thread is hanging. Make several thread wraps. First is going to be a pinch wrap so that I'm not pulling that Zelon material down underneath the hook, but keeping it up on top. Making a few more wraps forward. clipping off the excess, which I don't need. Of course, a little bit of this goes a long way. You can tie many flies with just a small shank of this. Now I want to trim this Zelon tail to be about the same length as the shank of the hook, because it represents then the shuck, so to speak, the outer covering of the insect, which is shuck comes off and peels back. So it wants to be about the same length. And just going to make a sort of a erratic type of cut here to trim that off at about the same length, as I said, of the length of the shank of the hook. Trim a little bit more. Now, I've stopped my thread just about maybe 3 or 4 turns towards the front of the hook. And so what I'm going to do next is I'm going to apply the dubbing that's going to be used for the abdomen. And I'm going to do that right now. And I'll try to explain as I'm doing this why I'm dubbing it now. And this is sparkle dubbing, and it's relatively difficult to put on to the thread. So actually I've decided I'm not going to use that. Instead I'm going to go back and use another type of material, which is some poly yarn. Also has Antron fibers in it. And I'm going to just tie in a small length of this. It's going to be much easier for a beginner to use this rather than to use the Antron material. So just wrapping in, tying in a little bit of this material here and wrapping back towards the bend of the hook. And then I've already pre-selected a saddle hackle. This is in cream. I prefer cream rather than the pure white because it is more realistically simulating the color of the fly. Trimming off the excess, we really don't need all of that. And trimming a little bit of the fibers on the bottom. I'm laying this right in front of, and if you've noticed, I brought this dubbing material here to the rear, and that's where I'm going to tie in the hackle with the shiny side facing me, or the convex side towards me, and I'm going to tie that in with several wraps. And I'm going to do something a little bit different than usual. Notice I'm taking the first 2 wraps in front of the hackle, and I'm taking one behind it, and then one more in front. That gives a little bit more security to that hackle so that it won't pull out. Now I can wrap over that stem and bring my thread forward, stopping just about 2/3 of the way forward. And now I'll just hold that out of the way, and I can begin to wrap this poly yarn type material forward to create an abdomen. And because it has some Antron in it, it's going to give a glistening yet a sort of a slightly bushy appearance to the thorax, which makes it more realistic. And remember, in the adult, the thorax and the abdomen of most freshwater types of insects, whether they be caddisflies, stoneflies, or mayflies, the abdomen of the mature form, the adult, is much thinner than is the abdomen of the nymph, which of course has a shuck over it, and that's why that's a little bit more rotund in shape. So I have this now about 2/3 of the way forward. I'm going to lock that in place with several thread wraps. And then clip off this excess. Now it won't hurt to put in 1/2 hitch at this point just to secure my dubbed thread. And then I can pull that out of the way while I am, wrapping the hackle forward. I'm going to use my hackle pliers, and that way I'll be able to turn the barrel of my vise and palmer this in. Palmering, of course, means wrapping forward in a series of circular wraps. So I'm wrapping this starting right at the bend of the hook and then beginning to wrap forward. With each turn, I'm moving the hackle feather a little bit forward. And as you can see, I hope, on the video, the hackle fibers are sticking out around the whole circumference of the hook. Now I stop at that 1/3 point because this is where we're going to put in the wing of the fly. I'll make a few more, I'll tighten up my thread a little bit, make a few more wraps there. Come behind the hackle fiber, the hackle feather, one more, one or two in front, and then I can clip off this hackle feather. And I'm going to pull those fibers back a little bit, make a few more wraps, and one more 1/2 hitch. Next thing I'm going to do is lay down one layer of thread up to the eye so that there's a base there for the wing. Now I'm going to bring my thread back to the location where the abdomen stops. And I want to, at this point, trim off the hackle fibers on the top so that they won't intrude on or spread out the wing. So I'm going to have a nice, concise wing. Let's examine that. Okay, I'm happy with that. The next thing I'm going to do is apply the deer hackle wing. I've already pre-selected this light deer hair. This is pretty nice skin. There's not much under hair on it to sort of clog up everything. And I've already removed some of that under coating and put it in my hair stacker. I'm going to stack that down and then, of course, pull out my deer hair. And as you can see, the tips are all lined up very nicely. Want to clean out some of the excess if there is and trim off some of the butts. And then I'm going to check and see whether that's about the density I want, and it is. I'm holding this deer hair so that the tips are just where at the base of the abdomen, or right at the curvature of the hook. And then I lay that right up on top, make one loose wrap around, another loose wrap, and then pull up. And what that does is it tightens that down. Now, one of the tricks that I've learned, so to speak, or one of the types of procedures in working with deer hair, is that you always want to hold on to the wing portion, regardless of what you're doing at the front of the wing, because that's going to keep the material from turning around to the side or the underside. Now I begin to make much tighter wraps, again pulling down, and I'm wrapping through some of those fibers, drawing them down. I hope that you can see I'm putting more and more pressure on until I get to a point where I think that this is pretty secure, and it is. And then I can lift the butt section up with my left hand and make several thread wraps underneath that's basically going to anchor that wing in place. And then using my half hitch tool, I'm going to finish this off. A few half hitches. Cut my thread. And then trim this off so that it has sort of a sloped head. And this is just trimming off the butts, like so. Any of the stray fibers. Okay. Now, the next thing that I want to do, you noticed before, I already trimmed off the hackle fibers on the top. Now we're going to trim them off at the bottom to be the gap of the hook. So I'll just come along with my scissors and trim off the underside so that the hackle fibers that are sitting down towards the bottom, they'll be on the surface of the water, are going to be just about the same length as was that gap of the hook. And it looks pretty good on that side too. Okay, I have one stray fiber there. I really don't like that guy. And now a drop of head cement on there, and we are just about finished. Okay. And there we have a skittering emergent white miller. Well, I hope that you've enjoyed today's fly tying to the extent that we were able to tie two different versions or two different presentations of the white miller. The first that we tied was the emergent. Put this more in focus. There we go. The emergent pattern, and which would be hatching during the normal daily life cycle of the whitefly, be hatching probably from late afternoon to early evening. And then we have, of course, the mature adult, so-called emergent whitefly pattern. Now, if you were to look at the internet and you were to put in the term white miller, you'll find a variety of patterns that represent the white miller. And so certainly you're free to vary it, get some instructions off the internet of other ways to tie these patterns. I tend to like these two for the following reasons, is that I can fish the two of them in tandem, and perhaps the fish will key on the subsurface variant of it, and or they may start hitting the surface pattern. That would be the more mature emergent caddis. Again, the most prolific hatch of the whitefly in our area, in Maryland and in the Virginia area, and even in Pennsylvania, comes throughout the latter part of the month of July. But there's no reason why you couldn't continue to fish with these two flies as you go through the summer. And also because they both represent caddis, as there are other species of caddis flies that hatch throughout the year, starting in spring through the summer and into the fall. You could mix it up using the same tying techniques to represent other caddis forms. Caddis are very prolific, and they're one of the major food forms for trout, as well as for other species that would be living in the same waters, smallmouth bass, bluegills, crappie, whatever. So don't hesitate to use them for some of the panfish that might be in your area. And I'm sure that you'll have a great day fishing with them. As I might have mentioned, fish them in tandem, fish them singly, fish them in combination with perhaps other dry flies or a wet variant that's going under the surface. So don't hesitate to experiment. Oftentimes we find just the right thing that works in combination when we're in our favorite waters. So I wish you the best of luck. Tight lines to you all.